Greetings and welcome to episode 38 of Bible 180, 180 episodes between Genesis and Revelation. We are on Judges today. Again, we talked about Gideon yesterday. We talked about Ehud and Deborah the episode before. And now we are on Samson from Judges chapter 13. Now, most of us know the famous story of Samson, how Delilah cut his hair, made him lose his strength, and in a final act of defiance, Samson puts his strong arms against the pillars of the temple, and they crash down among the evil Philistines. That's the short story. That's the Sunday school version, that we know that Samson was a strong man. In fact, we've even heard that Samson is the strongest man who ever lived, and most of us admire strong people who seem to have it all together. Strong people are people that we admire, but Samson wasn't really all that he's cracked up to be. In fact, Samson, though he was strong physically, spiritually, he was a weakling. Physically, he was powerful, but spiritually, he was willy-nilly. Physically, he was the Rambo of the Old Testament, but spiritually, he was the Pee Wee Herman of the Old Testament. Spiritually and morally, Samson was a disaster. So what we're going to look at is the first couple of chapters in the middle of Judges, the seventh book of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges. Book of Judges has those seven judges who kind of keep on cycling through the terrible running away from God, then repentance, and then restoration by God. The story of Samson in Judges 13 was where Samson was born, and as Samson grew as a young child, God blessed him. Right from the beginning, he was a special child. He grew up in a godly family. He had God's blessings on his life. He had supernatural strength. He was probably voted most likely to succeed in his high school class. He had unlimited capabilities and potential. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, but Samson was a weakling. Even though he was raised in a godly home, even though he was dedicated to God as a baby, as a young man, he took a Nazirite vow, which is a vow of complete dedication to God in all things, what he ate, what he drank, and how he lived in righteousness. But Samson, as he got into middle school, temptations started hitting him at the middle school dances, and he started growing away from God and the vows that he had made to align his life with what God wanted for him. Like I said, Samson was a strong guy physically, but morally and spiritually, he was a weakling who kept on giving in to his own desires. And if you look through the story of Samson, you'll see three mistakes he made in his life that brought him down. Three things that we can learn from that are good for us to know. Three characteristics that not only weakened his life, but can weaken yours. Each one of those, let's talk about. Samson's first mistake was self-indulgence, a lack of self-control and undisciplined living. His first mistake was giving in to temptation whenever he saw it. Temptations are those kind of things that are kind of left uncontrolled in our lives that weaken us. Self-indulgence can take many forms. It might be the way in which you spend money, might be about food or sex or alcohol or drugs, your emotions, whatever it is. Anything that is out of control in your life can ruin your life. For Samson, it was women. Samson had a weakness for women. In fact, after his stellar upbringing, which is told about in Judges 13, in the next chapter, we have his very first encounter. Samson went down to Timnah and saw a young Philistine woman. That is, she wasn't Jewish. She was a part of the people who were oppressing them. When he returned to his father and mother, he said, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as a wife." That was his father. Get her for me. His mother and Father replied, "Isn't there a nice, acceptable woman among your own relatives, among your own people? Must you go to an uncircumcised Philistine for a wife?" Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She's the right one for me." In Hebrew, it says literally, "Get her for me because she pleases me." That's how Samson lived his life. Self-indulgence. Not being able to say no to his temptations. The only thing that mattered was his own pleasure. She pleases me. Doesn't matter that God has said don't marry an unbeliever. It didn't matter that he had taken a vow that said you don't marry an unbeliever. It didn't matter that his parents said, "Dude, you're looking for trouble." He was self-indulgent, and that happens to us. It happens to us. Our typical excuse for giving into temptations is often the attitude, just this one, it don't matter. It doesn't matter. Just this one time. In fact, Satan's favorite rationalization to draw you into sin is the thought that you think, it's just a small thing. It's not a big deal. Just this once. Besides, come on. Everybody's doing it. But as we see with Samson and his self-indulgent life, giving into temptation is only his first mistake. Because his second mistake that Samson made with his life is that he lived in a constant state of resentment and anger. Samson was always ticked off about something. He wasn't just upset. He reacted violently in a fit of rage, and his primary motivation in life was to get even and to get revenge. He does that in an increasing way. In Judges 14, Samson kills 40 men just because of their clothes, and he wanted their clothes so much that they had gotten at Nordstrom's that he burned with anger and resentment. In the next chapter, Samson seeks revenge on some Philistines who'd done him wrong by catching 300 foxes, tying their tails together in pairs, and lighting a torch to each one of the tails, and then let the foxes burn down the grain fields of the Philistines, burn the grain, the vineyards, and the olive groves. A couple verses later, the Philistine army comes against him in battle. He looks around and finds the fresh jawbone of a donkey and starts fighting him. And in Judges 15, it says he killed 1,000 of the Philistine armies with the jawbone of an ass, of a donkey. Samson's life was simply out of control. He was hot-headed. He was angry, he was resentful and uncontrolled. Bitterness was weakening his heart. Anger racked his mind. Self-indulgence infested his soul. He was in a deep pit and was continuing to dig. Samson's third mistake was his carelessness. His strength was a gift from God, but he continually misused and abused it. He had taken a Nazirite vow when he was a child, which included no alcohol, a special diet, and a vow never to cut his hair. Never to cut his hair. It was a way of saying that his life was to be completely lived for God and following God in everything he did. And so the strength of Samson was not in his long hair. The strength was his commitment to God when he was young, saying, "God, I'm going to live for you and you only." That commitment was made evident in his long, uncut, flowing hair, which I used to have. I don't anymore, but I used to have. So the problem is that Samson, as he grew, forgot his vows. He was careless. He was a gamer. He was a playboy. He toyed with temptation to see how close he could get his life to the edge without falling off, but he was careless. In Judges 16, we have the famous story of the encounter with Delilah. Delilah was Samson's wife of the day because he had many of them. And one day the Philistines came to Delilah and said, if you find out the strength of your husband, we will give you $1 million. Delilah, being a treacherous person, took the bait. She went to try to find out Samson's strength from him 4 different times. In bed in the evenings, she would ask him, Samson, honey, what makes you so strong? And Samson would give her fake answers. He said, if you put silky strands on my arms or weave my hair into dreadlocks, maybe I will lose my strength. Each time she did it, the Philistines would come in and Samson would kill them and the game would go on. Finally, Delilah asked him a 4th time, Samson, please. She pleaded with him. She cried over him. She nagged him until he finally told her that if his hair was shaved, he would lose all of his strength. That's what Delilah did that night. Here's what happened in Judges 16, verse 19. Having put him to sleep on her lap, she called a man to shave the 7 braids of his hair and began to subdue him so that his strength left him. Then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And Samson awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out and shake myself free. And then these words, but he did not know that the Lord had left him. He did not know that the Lord had left him. That's one of the most tragic statements in the Bible. He wasn't aware of what was happening, how his lifestyle was slowly weakening him bit by bit. It was a gradual seduction process. He didn't start out with plans to be a failure, but it came on him gradually. He gave up on his commitments. He gave up on his values. He gave up on God because all he could think about was himself. The Philistines grabbed Samson and the scene quickly deteriorates. They gouged out his eyes. They took him down to Gaza, bound him with bronze shackles, and put him in prison. The champion of Israel, the strong man, had now lost everything. He lost his power, he lost his potential, his freedom, his influence, and all because he made the simple little excuses. It's only happening once. It's only a little thing. It can't be that bad. Everyone's doing it anyway, so why shouldn't I? But that is, of course, a farce. Little things matter. Little sins give in to greater sins. Faithlessness leads to apostasy. Samson had dedicated his life to God as a child, but as he grew, he gave up on God and became so full of himself that he thought that he didn't need God. Interesting thing. In spite of all that, God did not give up on Samson. At the time Samson was doing his own thing, forgetting about God, God never forgot about Samson. God was willing to give Samson a second chance and a fresh start. Because in prison, it says in Judges 16, listen to this, Samson's hair began to grow again. Samson's hair began to grow again. It was a time in prison when Samson was probably able to think, Lord, I've blown it. I've made a royal mess of my life. God, give me a second chance. Samson's hair began to grow again, and his commitment to the Lord began to be rekindled. That deep spark of covered commitment began to flame within him. And that's when the Philistines took Samson into the pagan temple to make fun of him. They put him between 2 pillars, 2 columns. They didn't know that he had been praying, committing his life, getting back to God. And Samson prayed, Lord God, remember me and strengthen me. Only this time once, God, as my last effort, let me avenge mine enemies. Samson's hair began to grow again. And he put every fiber of his muscles against those columns, and it collapsed, and 3,000 enemy people were killed. The greatest victory of his life, and that's why he's mentioned in Hebrews as a hero along with Abraham and Noah and Moses. And the great thing about Samson is that Samson is really the prodigal son of the Old Testament. Samson goes and wastes his inheritance on wine, women, and song. Finally, at the end, comes back to the father who's been waiting for him to return and give him a second chance. Samson is kind of like the thief on the cross who in his dying moments said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Samson is one who shows us that if God can take his life after he blew it in so many ways and give him a second chance to use it for good, God can take your life, give you a fresh start, a redo to use for God's good. You know, we don't have to make all the mistakes that Samson did. We don't have to get so far from God that we have to become like the prodigal son or the thief on the cross. But we can ask ourselves those preventative questions. Samson didn't ask what was out of control in my life. Samson didn't ask, what am I resentful about? Samson didn't ask, who am I committed to? The good news is that we can learn from Samson, the Old Testament prodigal son, the Old Testament thief on the cross, because it's never too late. It's never too late. Remember that old song? Living for Jesus, a life that is true, striving to please him in all that I do. Yielding allegiance, glad-hearted and true. This is the pathway of blessing for me. Think of that. Think of Samson and the mistakes he made that you can avoid in your life. So make it a great day. Be grateful. I look forward to being with you on the next episode. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.